I was pretty excited to start The Fall of Hyperion. After I finished the first one, I already had the second one on my shelf and lined up and ready to go. Normally, I like to space myself between authors. I'll read one author predominantly, but I'll space them out with somebody else in between. And that's not the case. That's not what I did here this time. With Hyperion, I just straight shot all 4 of them in a row. Didn't stop. And I went straight into the second one. I was pretty excited off of the last one, because the last one was pretty good. I've never been a big fan of space opera, and yet Dan Simmons pulled it off. But then again, Dan Simmons usually pulls shit off. He is, as I've said before, my favorite author, probably. The best part about this book, for me personally, was the fact that it was a novel, a standard novel. The last book was 6 independent stories. I don't care for the whole Canterbury Commons type of several stories line up to make one type of deal. It's just not a narrative device that I really like that much. However, Dan Simmons abandons that for this book, and I'm personally grateful. I prefer a traditional novel. I like enjoying fucking around with the structure and stuff. I just don't like independent short stories. They're just not my bag. Fall of Hyperion is long, but it's not overly long. It's about 129,000 words. That's about 517 pages paperback, at least the copy that I read, and it is definitely a valued continuation to Hyperion. As a matter of fact, I would probably say this is where the Hyperion series peaks. I think most people have agreed with me. The very little discourse that I've done online, I don't talk to people online very much. But anyway, the little discourse that I have done, though, this seems to be generally the best. There are several reasons why the next 2 books seem to pale in comparison to this one, and several reasons why this book, in my opinion, is better than the first. All of the characters in the last book that we met, Bron Lima, Martin Silenis, Cassad, we follow the 6 pilgrims from the first book, which is nice. We get to actually see what happens to them. We get to continue on. It's not just we're not stuck SOL not knowing what happens to them, which is nice. There are quite a number of new characters added in as well, and through these characters' eyes, we get to explore a lot more of the hegemony of man and get to see many more different locations throughout the hegemony. And oh boy, one of the many places that Dan Simmons shines. He's really good at making you feel every single fucking world that there is. It's really good. I enjoy it. You get to hear a lot about the politics and about the logistics of war, intergalactic war nonetheless, and all of the factors that go into that. We talk about all sorts of really cool fucking science fiction shit in this book as well. We get a much more in-depth look at the techno-core in this book, which is really fucking cool. The Shrike is back, which is, it's the fucking Shrike, right? The time tombs are very fascinating, getting to learn about them. We talk about how faster-than-light communication is possible, the labyrinth, all sorts of really fun stuff. There were a lot of characters in this book. Quite a lot, right? We added on even more than what we had last time. A lot of the book is told from Joseph Severn's point of view, who is the other Keats persona that was created, right? I didn't particularly care too much for him as a character, but I also didn't dislike him. He was perfectly fine to carry on the plot as it was. I did some research on the real-life John Keats while I was reading this book, so I did get, some spoilers, which was a little bit unfortunate, but that's okay, because this is, as much as this is a science fiction book, Dan Simmons also loves history, right? Dan Simmons did a lot of historical fiction later in his career, but he even did quite a bit of historical fiction then, because, again, John Keats was a real person, and he's included him here. It's not exactly a spoiler, is what I'm trying to say here. I didn't feel like it was spoiled for me that I knew what happened to John Keats. It almost filled me with a little bit of dread, because it was just like, oh shit, well, I see how this is going to end. CEO Gladstone was pretty alright as well. Most of the characters, in fact, that Dan Simmons really added or focused on in this book were pretty okay. The core pilgrims are really the best characters in the book, but CEO Gladstone was pretty alright. There was nothing wrong with her. I didn't mind her. I think she did technically show up at the very beginning of the first book for a little bit, and maybe a little bit throughout, but she's actually focused on in this book. We actually get a little bit from her point of view in the Fall of Hyperion, and so we get to flesh out her character a little, which is in some ways kind of nice. It's always nice to get to meet a character. However, she just wasn't my favorite character, so I wouldn't have minded if there was less of her, or if it was done in a slightly different way. I have not won the Hugo, so take my advice with a grain of salt. Now, the one character that really fucking stood out, aside from the pilgrims, was Amun. Amun was one of the AIs, one of the ridiculously fucking cool-looking AIs. He speaks in, like, poetry or Zen koans or whatever the fuck. I feel like if we get to the point where there are such amazingly intelligent AIs that are, like, obviously so much more advanced than humans, that's probably what it would be like to try and actually communicate with them. We would really have to puzzle it out and figure out what the fuck exactly they meant. I'm not a computer scientist, so, again, take my word with a grain of salt. Out of the original cast, Bron Lamia, I actually really liked her in this one. The last book, I didn't care for her so much. She was okay, didn't piss me off, didn't make me fall in love either. She was okay in Hyperion. But in Fall of Hyperion, I came to actually really like her. She very well may be my favorite character in the series, next to Martin Salinas, who... Martin comes back and he's just as much of a slippery bitch. I fucking hate Martin, and I love to hate Martin. He's great. I also came to appreciate Kassad quite a little bit better, mostly because there wasn't as much romance. I think the narrative of the book also allowed me to enjoy him a little bit more. We weren't stuck with him for a very long time. We could go away from him for a little bit. We could come back, and I could see that. That's just something that appeals to me as a reader. That's something that I like, personally. Oh, my God. And then, of course, Saul. And Saul is, oh my God. Dan Simmons managed to take the emotional impact of the story, the best part of the last book, and just dig that dagger a little bit deeper with, oh my God, Saul Weintraub is the best fucking character in this book, except for Bron Lamia and for Martin Salinas. There's a lot of really good characters in this book. As you can tell, I think The Fall of Hyperion was way better than the first book. There are a ton of other characters that I could talk about, but again, this is a really, really large cast in this book. I couldn't reasonably take the time to talk about all of them. One of the biggest detriments of this book, the thing that probably hindered the book the worst, though there were very few things that hindered it, were the war room scenes. CEO Gladstone and all of her army people are having to sit and discuss the logistics of war, and about communication, and about statistics, and like, oh my God, everything. There was a bunch of it, and it was really dry and boring. Dan Simmons did his job there well. He did his research. He included everything that he realistically needed to, but Dan Simmons, not only in this book, boy, in the war room scenes, you can feel it drag on quite a bit. At least I did. Joseph Severn dying was pretty rough. You know, Joseph Severn dying was pretty rough, but again, I knew ahead of time, because of the research that I did on John Keats, that he was going to have this long death from fucking tuberculosis. And, you know, that sucks, right? I do wonder if maybe if I hadn't had it spoiled for me, maybe I would have been a little more chewed up inside, but, yeah, you know, c'est la vie, right? The labyrinths were really cool, and I really wish that Dan was able to weave them into the story more. I would have loved to have seen more of the labyrinths. The Shrike is in this book, and the Shrike is fucking brutal, and the Shrike is fucking awesome. I'm still trying to figure out how I feel exactly about how the Shrike was beaten at the end of the book. Bron being able to just, like, crystallize it and shatter it was very Deus Ex Machina, right? There's always points in time where Deus Ex Machina is fine. I'm not upset with the book that it ended on that. I'm just curious. And that's a good thing to foster in your readers, I think, is a curiosity. Why the fuck did the Shrike shatter? Hopefully in the next 2 books, we're actually going to get to figure that out. I've read them, and I could tell you, but we'll discuss that later. Saul giving up his daughter. Man. Goddamn. Whew. That shit was good. That shit was fucking hard, man. Like, oh my God. You know it's coming by the end of the first book. You know that Saul is going to have to give up his baby. But, like, you don't think he's going to do it, but then he does it, and it's, oh my God, it hurts. It's just such good. Oh my God, that novel is such a fun. God, it took my heart and made things happen. That's the mark of a good fucking story right there. Things happen in the heart. The technocore was so fucking cool. The datasphere, the way he described it, was so awesome. It was also kind of interesting to see the internal politics of the technocore. I do appreciate how deep Dan considered the politics of each and every single faction of this book. Like, he did a really good job actually thinking about the goals and what they want and shit. And boy, it coalesces so fucking well by the end of the book. The Fall of Hyperion was much better than Hyperion. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I've seen a number of folks suggest that Hyperion is the best that Dan Simmons does. I wholeheartedly disagree. I think that Dan has topped himself elsewhere. But Hyperion is really fucking good, and Fall of Hyperion was even better. I think I'm probably going to give it a strong B+, maybe an A- if I'm feeling really generous, but I think a strong B+ is the better way to go. The end was well-rounded. We know what happens to all of the main characters. Everything seems fairly wrapped up, even though shit's kind of in a mess and kind of in chaos. It still feels resolved. There's still more. You could tell that there's more story that could come out of this, and that he wants to tell more. He just didn't quite know what to do with it yet, so he just took a break for, 10 years, I think he took a break before he did the next Hyperion book. By the time I finished with this, I wanted to jump directly into Endymion, which I did. I'm pretty sure I actually started that book the same day that I finished it. It's been approximately a year. We'll just guess about a year since I've read the whole series, and boy, it was worth it. Altogether, it was worth it. It does peak with The Fall of Hyperion, though. I myself have never written a series of books, but I have written a couple of things, so surprise, I'm going to sell you shit. This is The Circus, an American fantasy. If you want to read about creepy clowns, circuses, and how capitalism is going to destroy everything you love, then check out The Circus, an American fantasy. And here I have Portraits in Bloodlines. Inside are 23 short stories in the genres of horror, fantasy, slipstream, and even some science fiction. Portraits in Bloodlines has a little bit of everything for everyone. I'm also going to be at the Mad Monster Party from July 12th to 14th, 2024. Thank you for listening to me ramble. I'm going to go now. Goodbye.
Mayday, mayday, we're going down.